This 90-year-old woman was all dressed up. She's been sitting in the back of the car all day. The guard says you've been sitting here for 65 years. But the old lady smiled and said she could wait another 20 years. 65 years ago her husband promised he'd be back on Valentine's Day. But it's been 65 years since then. Their love has not been eroded by the long wait. It had grown deeper and deeper, especially when she saw her husband's young photo in the window. Her eyes became clear and sparkling. She couldn't help but reach out and touch her husband's face. More than 60 years ago, bit by bit came frantically to mind. And so begins a love story that will leave you in tears all night long. Jack and Annie were the envy of the town, until one day Jack received orders to go to the front. The two of them couldn't leave each other at the station, especially when Annie was pregnant and needed his company, until the train was about to start. Jack got on the train, but then it occurred to Annie that she hadn't sent her handmade peace cards, so she hurriedly dragged her heavy body all the way to eagerly look for Jack's figure. Jack opened the card. It was filled with Annie's love. The train went faster and faster. Annie's heart began to grow anxious. She tried to put on her best smile, so that Jack would remember her at her best. Annie was used to having Jack by her side, so she used to stare at the emptiness around her in the middle of the night. Whenever an airplane flew by, she'd look up because maybe Jack was sitting on it. Maybe he's looking down at her right now. The only thing Anne looked forward to every day was sending letters to Jack, even though they couldn't see each other. Annie would dress herself up every time, and then she puts her lips of love on the envelope. She believed that Jack could feel all these things. Jack reads it several times each time he receives it, and when he looked at the familiar handwriting, it was as if he had actually returned to Annie. She didn't know how long it took. Jack's letter finally reached Annie. Looking at the cute little model airplane, Annie was very happy, but she was soon worried, because Jack said the war was very serious. He promised to go back on Valentine's Day. He might not be able to go back now, and this airplane was a gift for the baby's birth. Jack finished writing and looked at the picture of Annie on the wall. He apologized beyond words. Annie kept this letter for over 60 years, because after that day, she never heard back from Jack again. This time the letter carrier brought her neighbor's sister a notice of her husband's death. As she watched her sister's devastation, Annie was in a state of panic, because she was afraid that one day, she herself would face the scene. Lisa had to give birth alone because her husband wasn't there. She ignored her exhaustion from the birth, and rushed to have the photos taken, just to show her husband what the baby looked like when it was first born. The arrival of the baby. It was as if the woman's thoughts of her husband were interrupted. In the busyness of taking care of the baby every day, time seemed to go by much faster. But then one day, the news came over the radio that the war was coming to an end. Annie told the children that Daddy was coming back. From that day on, Annie seemed to walk a little lighter. Every time she thought of Jack's return, her heart seemed to leap with excitement. But that day the letter carrier came. Anne's face instantly turned ugly, as if she had realized something, especially when she saw the letter carrier's car parked in front of her house. She felt as if the Grim Reaper was approaching. The corners of her mouth twitched again and again, wanted to cry but forced to hold back, until the letter carrier came and was about to speak. She almost fell to the ground. Then she sobbed and took the letter. Although missing on the battlefield is most likely a casualty, but Annie didn't see Jack's body. She was sure Jack would be back in time for Valentine's Day. The letter carrier had no choice but to leave. He'd seen too many people like Annie who didn't want to accept it, but none of them ended up waiting for the return of their loved ones. But Annie just didn't believe it, unless someone told her with certainty that Jack was dead. Otherwise she'll wait forever, until her hair turned gray and her youth was gone. She still hasn't forgotten her husband's promise to her. She was advised by many to give up her illusions and start a new life, but Anne was willing to be alone for the rest of her life to hold on to this true love.